Nelson Mandela, a name synonymous with hope, a beacon of resilience. Before the world knew him as a symbol of peace, he was a young man in a nation teetering on chaos. Born in a small village in the Eastern Cape, Mandela's early life was steeped in tradition. The rolling hills and vast skies of the Transkei whispered tales of freedom. Yet even in this idyllic landscape, the shadow of apartheid loomed large.
Imagine a world where your skin color dictates your worth, where the essence of your being is judged and controlled. This was the reality of South Africa under apartheid.
Mandela's journey took him from rural landscapes to Johannesburg. Here he witnessed apartheid's brutality. The city was a stark reminder of deep divisions.
Black South Africans were confined to overcrowded townships, yet Johannesburg ignited Mandela's spirit.
At the University of Fort Hare, Mandela honed his intellect. He immersed himself in law, history and politics. Engaging in debates, he challenged the status quo.
Mandela joined the ANC, fighting for Black South Africans' rights. Within the ANC, Mandela's voice resonated with millions. He organized protests, challenging apartheid.
The government responded with brute force. Peaceful protests were met with violence. The year 1960 marked a turning point in South Africa's history. The Sharpeville massacre, where police killed 69 peaceful protesters, shook the nation. The world watched in horror.
The massacre shattered illusions of peaceful resistance. Mandela embraced a more militant approach.
He co-founded Umkhonto we Sizwe, the ANC's armed wing. South Africa descended into violence and repression. The government intensified its crackdown on activists. Mandela and his comrades operated underground. The world watched as South Africa became a battleground. A people fighting for their dignity and freedom. The year was 1964. The world watched as Nelson Mandela disappeared behind the cold, unforgiving walls of Pretoria local prison. Charged with sabotage and conspiracy, Mandela and his comrades faced a grim future. Mandela, his spirit unbroken, used the trial to expose the injustices of apartheid. His words echoed far beyond the courtroom, reaching millions. Sentenced to life imprisonment, Mandela was transported to Robben Island. For South Africans, the news was a crushing blow. Yet, the spirit of resistance refused to be extinguished. Mandela's imprisonment ignited a new wave of protests and demonstrations. Robben Island, a place of stark beauty and brutal oppression, became Mandela's home for 18 years. Once a leper colony, it was now a prison, its isolation a tool to break spirits.
Mandela, prisoner 46664, endured labor, meager rations, and psychological torture. Yet Mandela's spirit remained unbroken.
He embraced education, studying Afrikaans and devouring books.
Mandela mentored fellow prisoners, teaching history, politics, and unity.
The prison became a school of resistance, forging South Africa's future. As years turned into decades, the global movement calling for Mandela's release gained momentum. From the streets of Soweto to the halls of the United Nations, people from all walks of life raised their voices in unison, demanding freedom for Nelson Mandela and an end to the apartheid regime that held South Africa captive.
Musicians, artists, and writers used their platforms to shine a light on the plight of South Africa and the man who had become a global icon of resistance. Concerts were held, songs were written, and books were published, all carrying the same message: free Nelson Mandela. The world was waking up to the injustice of apartheid, and the demand for change was becoming deafening.
International pressure on the South African government continued to mount. Sanctions were imposed, investments were withdrawn, and South Africa found itself increasingly isolated on the world stage. The apartheid regime, however, remained defiant, clinging to power even as the ground beneath them began to crumble.
Within South Africa, the struggle for freedom intensified. The African National Congress, operating underground, continued to lead the fight against apartheid. Townships became battlegrounds as young activists, inspired by Mandela's sacrifice, rose up to challenge the might of the state. The country stood on the precipice of change, the yearning for freedom palpable in the air.
In 1982, Nelson Mandela was transferred from Robben Island to Pollsmoor Prison. The move signaled the apartheid regime feeling the pressure of international condemnation and internal unrest.
The world watched as rumours of Mandela's failing health circulated. The possibility of his death in prison was a nightmare for both his supporters and captors.
The year 1985 marked a turning point. P.W. Botha offered Mandela his freedom in exchange for renouncing violence. Mandela refused the offer.
In a statement read by his daughter, Mandela declared, "Only free men can negotiate."
Mandela's words reverberated around the world, symbolizing principled resistance. His refusal to negotiate his freedom galvanized the international community. Mandela's unwavering stance sent a clear message. Apartheid would not be defeated through compromise, but through a fundamental shift in power. The world listened.
Sanctions against South Africa intensified. The country became a pariah state, and the economy teetered on the brink of collapse. Within South Africa, the groundswell of resistance grew stronger with each passing day.
Townships, once tightly controlled by the apartheid regime, became hotbeds of activism. Students, workers, and community leaders organized protests, strikes, and boycotts, paralyzing the country and exposing the cracks in the apartheid facade.
The government, facing unprecedented pressure from both within and outside the country, realized that the tide had turned. The time for negotiation, however long resisted, had arrived.
Secret talks began between the South African government and Nelson Mandela. Still a prisoner, but now recognized as the key to unlocking a peaceful transition to a democratic South Africa. The world watched with a mix of hope and trepidation.
Could a man who had endured decades of imprisonment emerge from the shadows of apartheid to lead his nation to a brighter future? Could he bridge the chasm of racial hatred and mistrust that had divided South Africa for generations?
The weight of history, the hopes of millions, rested on Mandela's shoulders. February 11, 1990, a date etched in the annals of history. The world held its breath as Nelson Mandela, after 27 years of imprisonment, walked free from Victor Verster prison.
The image of Mandela, hand in hand with his wife Winnie, his fist raised in a gesture of triumph, was beamed around the world. A beacon of hope illuminating even the darkest corners of the globe. Millions celebrated in the streets of South Africa and around the world.
The man who had once been considered a dangerous revolutionary was now hailed as a global icon of peace and reconciliation. His release was a testament to the power of perseverance, a victory for the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity.
Mandela's journey to freedom, however, was far from over. The road ahead was fraught with challenges. South Africa, still deeply divided along racial lines, was on the brink of a precipice.
The transition to a democratic society would require delicate negotiations, painful compromises, and a willingness to confront the ghosts of the past.
Mandela, with his characteristic grace and wisdom, embraced the challenge. He called for forgiveness, not vengeance. He urged his followers to lay down their arms and embrace the principles of democracy and equality.
His message, a message of hope and reconciliation, resonated deeply with a nation weary of conflict and yearning for a brighter future. The years following Mandela's release were a time of profound transformation for South Africa. The dismantling of the apartheid system began in earnest.
Negotiations led to a new constitution and South Africa's first multiracial elections.
The world watched as South Africans lined up together to cast their votes. The elections ushered in a new era of hope and possibility.
Nelson Mandela was elected South Africa's first black president.
The Rainbow Nation, coined by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, was born.
Mandela, ever the pragmatist, understood that the journey to a truly just and equitable South Africa was far from over. He worked tirelessly to address the socio-economic disparities that continued to plague the nation.
He established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a groundbreaking initiative aimed at confronting the atrocities of the past while fostering national healing and forgiveness.
He stepped down after a single term, choosing to dedicate his life to promoting peace, education, and social justice. Nelson Mandela's legacy extends far beyond the borders of South Africa.
Yet, even as South Africa celebrated its progress, the echoes of the past lingered. The struggle for economic justice, for equal opportunities, and for a society free from the scourge of racism and inequality continued.
The story of Nelson Mandela is a story of resilience, of courage, and of the enduring power of the human spirit to overcome even the most formidable obstacles.
the world stood still. On December 5, 2013, Nelson Mandela, the father of a nation, the icon of peace, breathed his last.
South Africa, the nation he painstakingly helped birth, was engulfed in a wave of grief. From the dusty streets of Soweto to the halls of power in Pretoria, South Africans wept openly, united in their sorrow.
Yet, amidst the grief, there was a profound sense of gratitude, a deep appreciation for the extraordinary life he had lived and the immeasurable sacrifices he had made.
Global leaders, dignitaries, and ordinary citizens from all corners of the globe descended upon South Africa to pay their respects.
Memorial services became a testament to his global impact, a recognition that Mandela's message of peace and reconciliation had resonated far beyond the confines of his homeland. In life, he had been a beacon of hope, a symbol of resilience against the forces of oppression. Mandela's passing sparked a global outpouring of tributes and reflections. World leaders, past and present, hailed his courage, his vision, and his unwavering commitment to justice.
Beyond the accolades and the official pronouncements, it was the stories of ordinary people whose lives had been touched by Mandela that truly captured the essence of his legacy.
The seeds of change that Mandela had sown in the hearts and minds of people across the globe continued to blossom. His life's work became a testament to the power of forgiveness, a beacon of hope for those struggling against oppression.
Mandela's legacy extended far beyond the realm of politics. He understood that true freedom encompassed not just the absence of physical chains, but also the liberation of the human spirit from the shackles of poverty, ignorance, and disease. His tireless advocacy for education, healthcare, and social justice continued to inspire countless individuals and organizations working to build a more just and equitable world.
Yet, even as the world celebrated Mandela's life and mourned his passing, a sobering reality cast a long shadow over the celebrations. South Africa, the nation he had fought so tirelessly to liberate, remained deeply scarred by the legacy of apartheid.
While significant progress had been made in dismantling the legal framework of racial segregation, the economic and social disparities that had been at the heart of apartheid's brutality persisted.
Millions of black South Africans continued to live in abject poverty, trapped in a cycle of deprivation and despair. Unemployment remained staggeringly high, particularly among the youth.
The rainbow nation that Mandela had envisioned, a society where all citizens had an equal opportunity to succeed, remained an elusive goal.
The echoes of apartheid resonated in the persistent racism and inequality that continued to plague South African society. Incidents of racial violence, discrimination, and intolerance served as a stark reminder that the journey to a truly just and equitable South Africa was far from over. Despite the challenges, the spirit of Mandela lived on in the hearts and minds of a new generation of South Africans.
Inspired by his legacy, young activists, entrepreneurs, artists, and community leaders were stepping up to demand accountability, to challenge the status quo, and to build a more just and equitable future for all South Africans.
They were the inheritors of Mandela's dream, the torchbearers of his legacy. They understood that the struggle for freedom did not end with the dismantling of apartheid. It required constant vigilance, unwavering commitment, and a willingness to challenge injustice in all its forms.
From the streets of Soweto to the universities of Cape Town, a new generation was rising, a generation determined to honor Mandela's legacy by finishing the work he had started.
They were driven by a profound sense of responsibility, a belief that they had a moral obligation to create a South Africa that lived up to the ideals of justice, equality, and opportunity for all. The road ahead would be long and arduous. South Africa, 25 years after Mandela's walk to freedom, stood at a crossroads. The euphoria of liberation had given way to the sobering realities of nation building.
Yet, beneath the surface of progress, a palpable tension simmered. The rainbow nation, while a beautiful aspiration, felt increasingly fragile, strained by the persistence of inequality and the ghosts of the past that refuse to be silenced.
The gap between rich and poor, black and white, remained a chasm, a stark reminder of the unfinished work of reconciliation and redistribution.
The question echoed through the streets, whispered in hushed tones. Had South Africa done enough to honor Mandela's sacrifice? Had it strayed too far from the path he had so carefully charted?
The answer, like the nation itself, was complex, a tapestry woven from threads of hope and despair. There were undeniable successes. But the promise of economic freedom, the dream of shared prosperity, remained elusive for far too many.
The vast wealth of South Africa, its mineral resources, its fertile land, seemed concentrated in the hands of a privileged few, while millions remained trapped in a cycle of poverty and despair.
The townships, those sprawling reminders of apartheid's cruel legacy, still stood in stark contrast to the affluent suburbs, a testament to the enduring legacy of dispossession.
The dream of a child born in Soweto having the same opportunities as one born in Sandton seemed as distant as ever.
The statistics painted a grim picture. South Africa held the dubious distinction of being the most unequal society in the world.
The unemployment rate, especially amongst young black South Africans, was staggering. The gap between the haves and the have-nots continued to widen, fueling resentment, frustration, and a growing sense of despair. See.
And then there was the cancer of corruption, eating away at the very fabric of society. It permeated all levels of government, from local municipalities to the highest offices in the land.
Stories of tender fraud, bribery, and state capture dominated the headlines, eroding public trust and undermining the very institutions Mandela had fought so hard to establish.
The African National Congress, the party that had led the liberation struggle, the party of Mandela, found itself increasingly mired in scandal. The moral high ground it had once occupied, the sacrifices of its past, seemed to be fading into a distant memory, replaced by a sense of disillusionment and betrayal.
The dream of a just and equitable society, a society free from corruption and greed, seemed to be slipping away. The hope that had fueled the struggle for freedom, the hope that had sustained Mandela through his long years of imprisonment, felt increasingly fragile.
The question was, what would South Africa do? Would it succumb to the cynicism and despair that threatened to engulf it? Or would it find a way to reignite the spirit of Mandela? Amidst the challenges, a glimmer of hope flickered. A new generation born free from the shackles of apartheid was coming of age.
This new generation, armed with education, with technology, with a deep-seated belief in their right to a better future, was beginning to find its voice. They were not afraid to challenge the status quo, to hold their leaders accountable, to demand more from their government, from themselves.
They were the inheritors of Mandela's legacy, but they were also forging their own path. They understood that the struggle for freedom was not a one-time event, but an ongoing process.
They were organizing protests against corruption, demanding better education and job opportunities, using social media to expose injustice and mobilize their peers.
The road ahead would be long, the challenges immense. South Africa today walks a tightrope. The legacy of Nelson Mandela, a guiding light, casts a long shadow. It illuminates the progress made, the chasm of inequality bridged, the peaceful transition to democracy he made possible.
The rainbow nation Mandela envisioned, a tapestry of cultures and colors living in harmony, is a work in progress. The scars of apartheid run deep, etched into the very fabric of society.
Yet to focus solely on the challenges is to miss the essence of Mandela's greatest lesson hope. Even in the darkest hours of his imprisonment, facing unimaginable cruelty, he clung to the belief in the human spirit's ability to overcome, to forgive, to build a better tomorrow.
That hope, that unwavering faith in the possibility of a more just and equitable world, is Mandela's enduring gift to South Africa, to the world.
The road ahead for South Africa will be long, the climb steep. There will be setbacks, moments of doubt, the ever-present temptation to succumb to cynicism and despair. But as long as Mandela's legacy lives on, as long as his example inspires action, there is reason to hope.
The responsibility to build a South Africa that truly honors Mandela's dream does not rest solely on the government's shoulders. It lies with each and every citizen, a collective effort to bridge divides, to fight for justice, to create a society that reflects the values of equality, dignity, and compassion that Mandela embodied.
The journey continues. It is a journey fueled by the hope Mandela ignited, the hope that sustained him through decades of imprisonment. Mandela may be gone, but his spirit, his legacy, his unwavering belief in the power of hope will forever illuminate the path towards a more just and equitable world.